An ancient Chinese relic known as the Dagger of Xi'an has been hidden away for what was hoped to be all eternity within the Great Wall of China. Previously possessed by an ancient emperor who used the dagger's ability to turn its owner into a dragon upon piercing the heart, in his quest to conquer all of China, he was finally defeated in battle and the dagger sealed away in hopes that it would never, ever be used again. Neither the game nor the instruction manual go into exactly why Lara is interested in the dagger, other than it's an ancient relic, and I guess that's Lara's interest right there. However, you very quickly find out that Lara isn't the only person interested in the dagger. Lara's quest for the dagger will bring her into direct conflict with Italian cultists led by a man named Marco Bartoli, who have been after the dagger for centuries, and even the Tibetan monks who have protected the dagger for generations. In the review I did for the original Tomb Raider, I said this. I remember it like it was yesterday. Christmas Day, 1997. My father had borrowed an issue of GamePro magazine from me in order to get the scoop on the hottest games coming out. That Christmas I received NASCAR 98, Fighting Force, which I have fond memories of playing, even if it didn't hold a candle to Streets of Rage, and my first introduction to the Tomb Raider series, Tomb Raider 2. I would later acquire the original Tomb Raider at a rummage sale, and despite the awkwardness of jumping back from Tomb Raider 2 to the original, have since come to appreciate the original as probably the best in the original Tomb Raider series, even if the second one is still my favorite. Tomb Raider 2 was my introduction to the series and will always stand as my personal favorite in the Tomb Raider series, and as one of the first 4 games I owned for the PlayStation, the first being Final Fantasy VII, will always be a defining experience for me when it comes to the PS1. Core Design was faced with a mammoth of a question in developing Tomb Raider 2. How does one follow up one of the most influential video games of all time? Whether or not it's given the credit it deserves, it's no secret that if one was to look at Tomb Raider objectively, not only did it have a monumental impact on that era of gaming, spawning countless clones, but its influence can still be seen today in modern gaming. To put it simply, there was no way that Tomb Raider 2 was going to surpass the original in terms of influence alone. However, in terms of expanding on the original, Core went with bigger, harder, and more. And overall, though my bias in this being my introduction to the series is obvious, came out with a game that, outside of losing a little in atmosphere, improved over the original in almost every other way. The levels in Tomb Raider 2 are bigger than in the original, have a ton more enemies thrown at you, enemies that take a lot more hits to put down, and there are a lot more death traps and tricky jumps in this sequel than in the first one. I've always found Tomb Raider 2 to be a much harder game than the original, which was no slouch in terms of difficulty in itself. With the extra difficulty added, Core hasn't left gamers helpless. Lara's arsenal of weapons has been expanded to include things like her handy-dandy grenade launcher, which blows enemies into tiny little chunks for good measure. And along with the arsenal, Lara's moveset has been expanded as well. In Tomb Raider 2, Core gave Lara the ability to look around while holding onto a ledge, allowing you to see more of the environment you are either dropping down or moving up to while hanging. An underwater roll was added for a quick turnaround. Lara can also do a mid-air roll, which helps immensely when doing the Lara dance, as I've dubbed it, moving around while fighting enemies to take as little damage as possible, and giving Lara the ability to turn around in mid-air to grab a ledge or ladder behind her. And Lara also now has the ability to climb ladders. That's right, Go back and play the original Tomb Raider. Did you notice that you played through the entire game and never climbed a single ladder? The addition of which opening up new level design options for Core. They even threw in a couple of vehicles for Lara to drive for good measure. As with the original, I would classify most of the 18 levels presented in Tomb Raider 2 as giant puzzles, often split up in between solving smaller puzzles that work towards beating the larger level puzzle as a whole. In between the puzzle elements, the exploration, action, and tough platformer elements take place. We used to classify this unique blending of puzzle-heavy design with action and platforming as being an action-adventure game, which is still a fitting classification for what you find in the original Tomb Raider series. The part that most gamers have struggled with in the original Tomb Raider series, aside from the tank controls, which with the square-based grid of Tomb Raider's level design is the best working control scheme for the game, is figuring out what to do and where to go next. Oftentimes, what to do next can be pretty obscure to the player, leading to hours and hours of wandering the levels, retreading every inch to find out what it is you may have missed in order to progress. Or as I stated in my original Tomb Raider review, the bad thing about Tomb Raider's level design is that oftentimes it's not clear what to do or where to go next in order to progress. But the good thing about Tomb Raider's level design is that oftentimes it's not clear what to do or where to go next in order to progress. So in other words, the bad thing is the game doesn't hold your hand. But the good thing is the game doesn't hold your hand. It seems that in recent memory, it has become sort of mainstream and popular to label obscure level design as bad design in games. I remember reading this sentiment in an old magazine in either the late 90s or early 2000s, and it has sort of become a common thought in gaming. However, I would disagree. I don't consider obscure objectives to be bad design. What I consider it to be is a different design philosophy than what has become the user-friendly mainstream philosophy we have become accustomed to in the modern age. You have to remember that the original Tomb Raider series was released in a time where developers put their heaviest emphasis on level design. Though there are story elements in the series, which for Tomb Raider 2 was almost as rare in 1997 gaming as it was in 1996 gaming with the original, the developers were not focused on pulling you into a story narrative. They weren't designing a forgettable gaming experience using story elements as a smokescreen for the lack of innovation like most modern games do. They instead were designing levels with which to challenge gamers at every level. Tomb Raider 2 challenges gamers at every level. Not only are quick reflexes required for the action elements and the many death traps involved, but your observation and problem-solving skills are also put to the extreme test in the game. Tomb Raider 2, like many games from that era, treads that thin line between "I can't figure out what to do, screw this game, I give up," and thus being put back on your gaming shelf to collect dust, to "Okay, I know I can beat this, let's give it one more try." The developers would design a level and then challenge you to figure it out with minimal clues. In many ways, it's almost like a battle of the wits to see if you can beat them at their own game. Literally. Though Tomb Raider achieved mainstream success, the difficult, sometimes cryptic solutions to the puzzles in the levels, mixed with, yes, the difficult-to-learn controls, kept it from being easily accessible to all gamers and still makes returning to it or playing it for the first time just as difficult. However, as I said in my original Tomb Raider review, there is still something so incredibly satisfying about finally figuring out the solution to a puzzle in the game. Getting lost does suck. tearing your hair out trying to figure out a tough puzzle as you backtrack through the entire level can be maddening. But finally figuring it out on your own brings a deep level of satisfaction and creates an experience you will never forget. This is a rare form of gaming satisfaction that you rarely see in modern gaming anymore. That being said, maybe you just think I'm blinded by my love for Tomb Raider and don't see bad design for what it is, and, well, maybe that's true. However, if we shift this towards another franchise, then please explain to me why in the 19 years of 3D Zelda games, the Water Temple is still the most infamous dungeon in all of Zelda fandom. Simply put, because unless you had a strategy guide, it stumped you, drove you mad, and gave you a huge sense of gratification when you finally beat it. In similar fashion, finally beating a tough level in Tomb Raider 2 brings that same feeling of gratification. Atmospherically, when playing through Tomb Raider 2 this time, I realized that the original seems to have a much more tense atmosphere. Even if Tomb Raider 2 still has a great atmosphere overall, and still builds up tension throughout the game. The same kind of tension and unsafe feeling that games like Resident Evil have. Lara is alone, traversing hostile environments with death traps and hordes of baddies around every corner, all trying to kill her. You rarely feel safe, and the few times you do feel a false sense of security are quickly shattered by an enemy lying in wait, an instant death trap being sprung sending Lara to her death, and even the sounds of distant footsteps of an enemy you can't see yet and have no idea if they are coming after you. Or just walking around on another part of the level, daring you to progress to where they're at. Tomb Raider 2 is still incredibly atmospheric and still builds a very good sense of tension. This game will still make your butt pucker countless times, sometimes startling the ever-living crap out of you. However, in trying to put my finger on what the big difference was, I realized something. A lot of fans say that Tomb Raider 2 is where the series first lost sight, taking Lara out of the tombs and adding levels that, while still masterfully designed, didn't make sense to be in a game called Tomb Raider. Levels like an oil rig set up with as many switches, keys, and booby traps as any of the ancient tombs. And while some of these levels do seem out of place, even if they do make sense under the story narrative the game is telling, these levels are still incredibly intense. In the offshore rig, for example, Lara, upon being captured by the cultist, has to escape from her prison cell and then traverse through the first part of the level, avoiding the baddies trying to kill her with absolutely no weapons to fight back with, leaving you frantically scrambling to figure out what to do while being hotly pursued. Even the Venice level, with its canals and dilapidated decaying houses, still always managed to capture my imagination as a teenager, and also has a fitting atmosphere as a result, despite not being ancient ruins, but a more modern decay of once decadent structures within an ancient city. Lara's adventures even take her to explore the wreckage of a sunken luxury liner, long forgotten on the ocean floor, but this also fits well with the atmosphere, even if Celine Dion didn't sing the theme song for the level. I then decided that maybe it's the fact that Tomb Raider 2 throws a ton more enemies your way. Everywhere Lara goes, every animal hates her, and hundreds of cultists are thrown at you trying to ruin Lara's day. But even with a heavier focus on action, there is still nothing quite like the feeling of entering a room and then suddenly hearing footsteps right behind you. Just because you expect baddies to show up more often doesn't mean they still don't startle you when they do. Plus, I've realized that in soon-to-be 20 years of playing this game, I have memorized when and where most of the enemies are going to come from. but still found myself being startled over a couple I had forgotten about. I then thought, maybe it's the Save Anywhere save system implemented in Tomb Raider 2 that may have eroded some of the atmosphere. Tomb Raider fans did complain that they thought this made Tomb Raider 2 too easy, which, what? No. But I can see it taking away some of the tension in where every time you feel a sense that danger awaits you around the corner, you can save your game, run around the corner, and even if you die, you start out right where you left off, thus saving you from having to backtrack large portions of the level as you did in the original because the save crystals were in static locations in the level. Tomb Raider 3 would later combine the save systems of the first two games, allowing you to collect a finite number of save crystals, but allowing you to use them anywhere in the level. However, the ability to save anywhere may save on backtracking and may give you a little feeling of safety whenever you save your game when feeling impending doom. It may even make some of the harder platformer elements less frustrating by allowing you to save before every hard jump so you don't have to backtrack. But it doesn't help you solve puzzles, defeat enemies, or make those jumps to begin with. In fact, you can even possibly save yourself into a corner if you're not careful. And at last I thought that maybe it's because the levels seem to have more ambient noise in the backgrounds than in the original. But that can't be it. As with the original, when you hear music in Tomb Raider 2, that is a sign that core design is trying to kill you. Something horrible is happening, and your first instinct is to run to safety. Get on top of a box, get somewhere, pull your pistols out, and start blind firing. The building up of tension is just as present in this game as in the original, and furthermore, some of the ambient background noise is super creepy. Take a listen to this sample taken from the offshore rig and diving area. I'm pretty sure that if you heard this coming from your closet at night, you may never sleep again. I would totally have my stuff packed and be moved out the next day. And then finally it dawned on me. Why is it that some of the levels in Tomb Raider 2 seem to recapture the same spectacular atmosphere of the original, but others didn't? It wasn't the levels themselves, the hordes more enemies, the save system, or even the ambient sounds. I realized something. All of the levels in the original Tomb Raider took place seemingly underground. It had a deeper sense of claustrophobia mixed with a deep sense of loneliness. On top of the great sense of tension, all the death traps, all the puzzle elements taking place in sometimes wondrous ancient ruins was an overwhelming feeling that you could be 1,000 miles underground exploring an environment that hasn't been seen for a couple thousand years. No escape, no help, no hope. If you die, no one will ever find you. A lot of the environments in Tomb Raider 2 feel less cramped, less claustrophobic, more open, brighter, and you actually see the sun and sky. It seems that in expanding upon the original game and making a bigger experience, Core unwittingly sacrificed some of the atmosphere that made the original so good, leaving Tomb Raider 2 a little lacking when compared to it. Atmosphere and monumental impact on gaming as a whole aside, Tomb Raider 2 improved on the original Tomb Raider in almost every other way, taking my bias into account that this will always be my favorite game in the series no matter what. In the end, when you have a game that changes gaming like the original Tomb Raider, nothing you do in the sequel will ever live up to the original. The 2 T-Rexes and 1 dragon you fight in Tomb Raider 2 will never be as fondly remembered in gaming as the 1 T-Rex in the original. Final Fantasy 8 and 9 will always live in the shadow of Final Fantasy 7. I was one of the few that liked Super Mario Sunshine better than Super Mario 64. However, by comparison, Mario 64 will always be remembered over Sunshine and any other platformer in its generation for that matter. I like Quake 2 better than the original Quake, but the original will always be remembered more. Doom 2, Final Doom, and Doom 3 are spectacular games, but the original Doom is an icon. And the cycle continues, so on and so forth. It was inevitable that the memory of Tomb Raider 2, 3, The Last Revelation, and Chronicles would eventually fade into the dustbin of gaming's past, mixed with the later backlash against the series and the claims that every sequel was just more of the same and the formula was stale by gamers and the gaming media. I've always seen a double standard that there was no one to ever complain that Resident Evil 3 was actually the 6th mainline Resident Evil game released on the PS1, with Capcom rehashing the first one twice and Resident Evil 2 once with Director's Cut and DualShock versions, but hey, you know, who am I to say anything? In Tomb Raider's defense, at least every game was a completely different game in the series. Did the formula get stale in releasing 5 games in 5 years? Yeah, probably. In all honesty, I have played the first 2 Tomb Raider games to death, but have barely played Tomb Raider 3 at all, only recently acquiring it. I've played a good portion into The Last Revelation whenever I picked it up a few years back, and I really like the open exploration feel of it, but have yet to play anything but the opening levels of Chronicles. However, I still have to give props to Core Design, who were on a creative high for 5 good years, able to create well-designed, deeply thought-out levels with heavy puzzle elements and great atmosphere in 5 Tomb Raider games. Core would later join developers like 989 Studios, who could never quite make the jump from PS1 to PS2. I haven't played The Angel of Darkness, but I do own it. And I know it was the Tomb Raider game that pretty much killed Core Design. I really dug Hurdy-Gurdy though. The bottom line! Tomb Raider 2 was not only a defining experience for the PlayStation for me, and yes, I know it was also on the PC, but will also always be my favorite in the series. I know the controls are hard, the early PS1 graphics haven't held up, and most modern gamers will pass it up for new remakes or newer games on a newer system, but I truly urge most gamers to give this and the rest of the original Core Design Tomb Raider games a shot. Learn the controls, learn the game, and you may come to appreciate the sheer amount of thought put into every level of these games. You'll be frustrated to no end, you'll die a lot, you'll struggle with controlling Lara, you'll be wowed by the atmosphere, jump out of your seat at times, and incredibly satisfied whenever you finally beat a level. I will always love this game and the original Tomb Raider series.
Don't you think you've seen enough?